What's going on? So my last video, I reviewed Adonis Live, his video about South Africans feeling justified of kicking out other Africans such as Nigerians, especially Nigerians, because it's not just South Africa. A lot of different countries feel the same way about Nigerians. It's an unfortunate stereotype, but it's not the first time hearing this. Even when I was a kid, I hear about the Nigerian princes trying to say, "Hey, I need money to get back home to my family, etc." So there's nothing new. The most scammers though come from India. Just FYI, Indian scammers are number one. At least when it comes to digital and phone scamming, is Indians. But of course, you're talking about not the entire country, just a lot of bad apples. Not even a little bad, a lot of bad apples. Keep that in mind. So, people would assume that if you're gonna have so much smoke for the other Africans in the nation, that's about South Africa, that you will eventually point toward the Dutch people or the white South Africans, the Boers, they call them, and or that's like white farmers, something like that. But there was one country who actually has fulfilled the dream of the Pan Africanists. They actually kicked out the white man. Now, Zimbabwe, I don't know much about Zimbabwe. I know a little bit. Shout out to John Priza. But when it comes to the history, I know they used to be called the bread basket of Africa because they had a great economic opportunity at one point in time. But was that with the white people or without the white people? And something tells me that was when the white people were involved, because right now it is the exact opposite. And we're going to find out together. Hopefully this video has a lot of information that we can educate each other, me and you.
Look at this. A banknote. $100 trillion. Printed on actual paper by an actual government. Handed to actual people who then realized, standing at a shop counter, trying to buy groceries, that it couldn't even buy a bus ticket across the capital. That note exists. It's real. You can hold one in your hand. Museums have them on display. Collectors sell them on eBay, and the darkly absurd irony is that today, that $100 trillion note is worth more as a curiosity than it ever was as currency inside the country that printed it. And here's the thing. The country that printed it didn't collapse because of a war. It didn't collapse because of a natural disaster. It didn't collapse because of some foreign invasion or a plague that wiped out half the population. It collapsed because of a decision, a political decision, one that was supposed to fix a historic injustice, one that instead broke an entire economy almost overnight. For decades, Zimbabwe's leadership promised a simple solution to the country's problems. Take the land, remove the white farmers.
You hear that? That's literally what people are asking South Africans to do. And of course, it's not going to be that simple. Because in my last video, I was saying, if you're going to take the land back, you have to have the skills to run the land. If you're going to take the city, the infrastructure back, you have to learn how to build infrastructure, repair infrastructure. You have to learn these skills, because if you do not know how to do that, then taking it back from the powers that be, it makes no sense. You'll be better off learning first and then taking over.
Redistribute the farms to the people who deserved them. It sounded like justice. It sounded like the end of a colonial wound that had been festering for generations. But instead, it triggered one of the most dramatic economic collapses in modern history. Agriculture crashed. Food production fell apart. Hyperinflation destroyed the currency so completely that the government had to print notes worth hundreds of trillions just to keep up with prices that were doubling every 24 hours.
Wow.
And now, after years of denial, after decades of ruin, Zimbabwe's government is facing a humiliating reality. The farmers that it expelled may be the only ones who can actually fix the disaster that they left behind.
So, if I was Zimbabwe, and of course I'm talking shit, I'm armchair revolutionary here. Yeah, I would try to find a way to train the farmers, not from the white people they expelled, but somewhere else, and learn how to do it that way. Seems like most likely China is gonna come, and this is me just talking shit. I have no idea. I would assume China say, hey, we can help you, but in return, we're going to have ownership of your land for at least, let's say, 30 years, 20 years. Most likely that's what's going to happen because I had a conversation about my father, the U.S. versus China. Of course, I would say the Chinese are just the new colonizers. They're just more friendlier. Well, my father said, dating with the Chinese and versus America, America will take everything. Chinese will say, okay, let's take some of what you have. You could have the rest, which is a little bit more fair. I still believe there's still colonization tactics, just more deceitful, of course. But at least they have given the other nations some kind of say-so, some kind of power instead of taking the entire land for themselves.
This is the story of how a country destroyed the engine that was keeping it alive. Let's go back to before everything broke. In the 1980s and 90s, Zimbabwe had one of the most productive agricultural systems on the entire African continent. Not productive in a modest, developing world sense, but genuinely world-class. The country exported tobacco that was prized in markets from China to Europe. It grew maize that fed its neighbors. It built a farming infrastructure, irrigation systems, cold chains, contract networks, veterinary services that supported not just its own population, but the wider region. The numbers tell you everything. In the late 1990s, agricultural exports were bringing in between 30 and 50% of Zimbabwe's total foreign currency earnings. Think about that. Generating half the country's hard cash, and agriculture as a whole was driving roughly 60% of the raw materials going into the manufacturing sector. Every factory, every mill, every processor in the country was downstream of the farm. The land produced food. The food produced exports. The exports produced foreign currency. And the foreign currency kept the lights on. And that foreign currency funded government services, paid teachers and nurses and soldiers, and gave the country room to breathe. The system was tightly connected, which meant that when you pulled one thread, the whole thing could unravel. And beneath all of that success was a wound that had never healed, because this wasn't a clean and equal system. Not even close. When Zimbabwe became independent in 1980, the farming sector that powered the economy was concentrated almost entirely in white hands. Around 4,400 white farmers.
Imagine South Africa took away their farms. Would it be the same thing? I think so. I'll tell you, if you're going to talk this shit, you got to learn this shit.
Controlled roughly 42% of the most fertile, best irrigated, highest productivity land in the country. More than 700,000 black families were living on the remaining communal areas, land that was often drier, harder to farm, and chronically overcrowded. Now, the reason stretched back over a century. Under British colonial rule, the Land Apportionment Act of 1930 had made it illegal for black Africans to purchase land outside of designated native areas. The most productive agricultural zones, the land that would become the backbone of the economy, were legally reserved for white settlers. By the time Zimbabwe reached independence, the racial distribution of land wasn't just unequal, it was a map of dispossession that went back generations. So the demand for land reform wasn't manufactured, and it wasn't political theater. It was a genuine historical grievance held by millions of Zimbabweans who had fought a liberation war and were still watching the best farmlands of the country remain off limits. That tension sat at the heart of the republic the moment it was born. The new government tried to address it. Through the 80s, it pursued a willing seller, willing buyer model, buying white-owned farms and resettling black families. Progress was made. Tens of thousands of families were resettled, but the pace was slow. The wealthiest, most productive farms largely stayed intact. And as the years passed, the contradiction deepened. The liberation movement governed the state, but the agrarian map of the country still bore the unmistakable stamp of colonial rule. By the late 1990s, the pressure had become impossible to contain, and that is when everything went wrong. By 1997, Robert Mugabe was facing a political crisis. War veterans, the core constituency that had brought ZANU-PF to power, were demanding the land that independence had promised them. In a move that would later be called the beginning of the fiscal end, the government handed 50,000 war veterans a one-time payment of 50,000 Zimbabwean dollars each, plus a monthly pension, unbudgeted, announced overnight. The Zimbabwean dollar crashed the same day.
Unbudgeted.
Then, in February of 2000, Mugabe put a new constitution to a national vote.
See,
it included clauses.
This is what happens when you have great ideas, but you don't have a reality check of how the money works, how it's going to replenish itself. They say the same thing about Mamdani, they say the same thing about Trump. You know, where are you getting the money? Where are you going to get the money from? And how are you going to replenish it? Are you going to tax more people? Are you going to tax more businesses? Like, where's it coming from? Everyone has a dream of making everyone have no one's poor. But when it comes to capitalism, unfortunately, there's no such thing as a rich people. There's no such thing as a rich person without other people being poor. It can't exist at the same time. Everyone cannot be rich. Everybody can be poor though, or at least the majority of people. But the majority of people cannot be rich, unfortunately.
Allowing the compulsory seizure of white-owned land without compensation. Zimbabweans rejected it. Mugabe didn't accept that answer. What followed became known as the Fast-Track Land Reform Program. War veterans and ruling party supporters began invading farms, armed, organized, protected by a government that ordered police to stand down and ignored court rulings that declared the occupations illegal. The violence was not abstract. David Stevens, a farmer, was tied up, beaten, and shot dead in April of 2000. Martin Olds defended his property for 3 hours in a gun battle before the attackers burned his house down around him. Alan Dunn was beaten to death after returning to his farm simply to pay his workers. Between 2000 and 2003, approximately 4,000 white commercial farmers were forcibly removed from their land. But here's a detail that often gets lost in the telling. More than 350,000 farm workers.
Like, I get it, play it back for slavery, but again, you gotta have a plan in place. It can't be on pure emotion.
The vast majority of them black Zimbabweans lost their homes and livelihoods at the same time. They were caught in the middle of a political storm that had nothing to do with them and everything to do with power. The government framed the seizures as economic justice, decolonization, empowerment, and most of the confiscated land was handed not to land-hungry families, but to Mugabe's political allies, people with connections, not farming experience. But the deeper problem wasn't who got the land. It was what was lost when the farmers left. Agriculture isn't just soil. It's not just weather and seed. Commercial farming at scale depends on systems that take decades to build. Irrigation networks, credit relationships with banks, supply chains for machinery and fertilizer, export contracts with buyers who trust your quality and your reliability, veterinary controls, seasonal finance, the management knowledge that turns a piece of land into a profitable operation year after year. You can seize a farm in a week. You cannot seize the knowledge required to run it. And so the system didn't transfer. It collapsed. Think about what that actually looks like on the ground. The new holders of land, many of them genuine families who had waited decades for a chance at something better, arrived at farms with no working capital, no access to credit, no equipment, no relationships with suppliers or buyers. The irrigation system stopped being maintained. Export contracts went unfilled. Livestock died. Seeds were not planted. Crops were not harvested. And the banks that had once financed the commercial sector found themselves holding loans backed by land that the government had just declared it could seize at any time. The entire financial architecture of Zimbabwean agriculture, built over decades, seized up almost overnight. This is what policymakers rarely tell you about nationalizing.
I think my headphones making music all goddamn night hurt my damn ear. Sorry, y'all. I'll be too transparent. I gotta take a shit off my ear.
A productive sector. The assets, the land, the buildings, the equipment, they're visible. You can photograph them. You can hand over the keys. But what you cannot hand over is the invisible infrastructure, the expertise, the trust, the relationships, the 20 years of hard-won knowledge about how to coax maximum yield from a specific piece of soil.
That's like you rob a bank, right? All right, cool. Now, what are you going to do with that money? You going to sit on it? How you going to hide it? I mean, I'm not trying to give bad ideas, but like, what are you going to do with that money? You got to have a plan for that, right? You can't just say, okay, cool, I'm gonna hide it in this safe, or I'm going to burn the car, I'm going to change clothes, and I might get a bow tie. You got to have a plan. So if you're going to pull a heist, now what are you going to do after the heist? You can't just go home and act like nothing happened. You got to have a way to, like, okay, finagle it, so that way, you're not traceable. In this case, just I predicted, they got rid of white people. Congratulations. Justice has been served. But now with all that power and the mass, and then the people hold on to it, or the president's friends. Whew. That money gone.
Oil in a specific climate. That knowledge walked out with the farmers, and it didn't come back. Foreign investment in Zimbabwe went from $404 million in 1998 to $3.8 million by 2003. Not a decline, that's near total evaporation. Tobacco production, the lifeblood of Zimbabwe's foreign exchange, fell from 228 million kilograms in 2000 to just 48 million kilograms in 2008.
Man,
that's a drop of nearly 80% in 8 years. Food shortages spread. By 2006, aid agencies estimated that between 2.9 to 5 million needed food assistance just to survive. The country that had been exporting grain to its neighbors was now importing food it can no longer grow itself. But even that, even the agricultural collapse, even the food shortages, even the mass displacement was not the bottom. The bottom was still coming. And if you want to understand how political decisions can collapse entire economies, how a single miscalculation can strip a country of everything it built, subscribe to Fall of Nations. Because what happened next in Zimbabwe became one of the most extreme economic disasters in recorded history. The government was hemorrhaging revenue. Agricultural exports had crashed. Factories that depended on farm output were shutting down. Tax receipts were collapsing. And Mugabe had a war in the Democratic Republic of the Congo bleeding the treasury dry at the same time. Spending that was being hidden from the IMF, underreported by around $25 million a month. His solution was just to print money. His advisors told him not to. Economists warned him it would end in catastrophe. He did it anyway. What follows defies comprehension. Inflation went from double digits to triple digits to quadruple.
Did they beat his ass? Kill him at least?
Then it kept going. By November of 2008, Zimbabwe's monthly inflation rate hit 79.6 billion %. That is not a typo. 79.6 billion with a B % in a single month. Prices were doubling every 24 hours. You could go to sleep middle class and wake up poor. Salaries became meaningless between payday and the afternoon.
Wow.
Pensioners who had worked their entire lives and saved carefully discovered their savings were worth essentially nothing. Shop owners were arrested for raising prices, which meant that stores simply ran out of stock instead. Supermarket shelves went empty, and the government's response was to print notes with more zeros. $100 billion. A $10 trillion note. And eventually, the one that became a symbol of the entire catastrophe, a $100 trillion banknote printed and circulated in 2008, worth less than the paper it was printed on. In 2009, Zimbabwe abandoned its own currency entirely. The Zimbabwean dollar was dead. The country switched to the US dollar and the South African rand to make prices mean anything at all. It had taken less than a decade to get there, from breadbasket to monetary graveyard in 8 years. The wreckage that followed lasted much longer. At its peak, Zimbabwe's unemployment rate hit 94%. That's not a typo either. 94. Millions of educated, skilled Zimbabweans, doctors, engineers, teachers, accountants, fled the country to find work abroad. The brain drain hollowed out the civil service, the health system, the schools. Western sanctions, imposed in response to human rights abuses, including the farm violence, closed off lines of credit from the World Bank and the IMF. For years, Zimbabwe existed in a kind of economic limbo, too broken to function properly and too isolated to get the outside help that may have stabilized things. The environmental damage added another layer of quiet catastrophe. With commercial farming gone and smallholder tobacco farmers unable to afford coal for curing their crop, they turned to wood. Forests started disappearing. An estimated 262,000 hectares of woodland per year were being stripped, of which 15 to 20% were to fuel tobacco operations. The land that had been seized in the name of justice was being slowly stripped of its trees as well. And through all of it, Mugabe blamed...
It's like a lot of space, though. I ain't gonna lie. Zimbabwe, like how much? Hold on. Let me see something. Zimbabwe real estate. Nigga, I'm be a motherfucking czar out there. Nigga, you want to see tricking to the next level out. I'm gonna show you tricking. Let me not sound like that. Sound like I'm taking advantage of people. But look, yo, if it's a deal, it's a deal. How much the property costs out there? 2023. Yeah, you want to see tricking. So now they have the US dollar and they have the rand out there. It's good to know. They got space. That's what I'm talking about. My big old age, space is necessary. Doing too much. Oh boy, I gotta do the whole conversion. 270 thou wow. Oh, come on, bro. You just told me you 95%. What do you mean a million? That's ooh yeah. Ooh wee. Family home. Oh, okay. I like stuff like this, by the way. Ooh wee. Ooh wee. Mosquitoes. Oh my god, I'll put a studio right there, right in the middle of the whole boom. Bam! Studio. You know, man, what the woman looking like? That's what I'm trying to see. I'm trying to see something. I'm trying to trick on somebody, make someone day. Make someone, yeah. Come on, baby. Make daddy happy. I'll pay your rent and your mama's rent. I'm getting ready to be a fool. Mine's over. See, someone producer told you the same mindset I got. Nah, they got gym dance saw. That's all I do now. I'm bugging. They got
blamed Western sanctions. He blamed his political opponents. He blamed everyone except the decisions that had set the whole chain reaction in motion. Then, in November of 2017, the military had had enough. Mugabe was removed in a coup. At 93 years old, after 37 years in power, he was gone. His successor, Emerson Mnangagwa, inherited a country that was still drowning in $21 billion of debt, most of it in arrears, shut out of international lending, an agricultural sector that had never been rebuilt, and a political situation so delicate that fixing anything required not antagonizing the people who had benefited from the chaos in the first place. Mnangagwa had a clear-eyed view of what needed to happen. He called Zimbabwe open for business, and he understood that one issue sat at the center of everything: the land. International creditors, the African Development Bank, Western governments, they all kept coming back to the same question: what are you doing about the farmers? In 2020, Zimbabwe signed the Global Compensation Deed, a landmark agreement to pay $3.5 billion to around 4,500 displaced mainly white farmers. Not for the land itself, which the government maintained had been seized under colonialism, only for the, quote, improvements, the buildings, the irrigation systems, the dams and infrastructure that the farmers had built. But behind the scenes, something else was already happening. Joint ventures were quietly being approved. Arrangements where white commercial farmers, or investors with capital and expertise, could partner with the new black landowners who lacked the resources to farm productivity. By 2024, more than 2,400 joint ventures had been approved across Zimbabwe. White farming expertise was coming back in through the side door, because the door that had been slammed shut 20 years earlier had left the economy bleeding. And it was working, at least in parts. Tobacco, the crop that had once defined Zimbabwe's economy, began an extraordinary comeback. In 2025, Zimbabwe produced roughly 353 million kilograms of tobacco, the highest output in the nation's history. Total earnings surpassed $1.2 billion, a record. A country that collapsed its own agricultural system so thoroughly it once couldn't feed its itself was now breaking export records. That's not a small thing. That's a remarkable comeback. But here's where the story gets complicated, because the headline does not match the reality underneath it. In April of 2025, 25 years after the farm invasions began, Zimbabwe made its first actual compensation payment to displaced white farmers. The amount was $3.1 million on a $3.5 billion commitment. That's less than 1/10 of 1%. Farmers' representatives called it a token gesture. Some of the most vulnerable, elderly, without income, desperate for food and health care, accepted the terms because they had no choice. The Compensation Steering Committee, representing the majority of displaced farmers, described the proposed treasury bonds as insecure and inadequate. Bonds, they noted, issued by a government that had already printed a $100 trillion note once before. And there's a deeper problem lurking underneath all this. Even as the government talked about bringing expertise back, it simultaneously passed a new law restricting agricultural land transfers to indigenous Zimbabweans only, not white Zimbabwean citizens, indigenous. Legal experts from the Commercial Farmers Union flagged it immediately as potentially unconstitutional under Zimbabwe's own 2013 constitution, which explicitly states that every citizen has the right to hold agricultural land regardless of race. In practice, any white farmer operating a joint venture still cannot own the land they farm. They cannot use it as collateral. They cannot get a bank loan. They can produce a record tobacco crop and still be one political decision away from losing everything. Some observers believe the compensation process may be partly strategic, that Mnangagwa's government is performing enough reform to keep debt negotiations moving while structuring the actual terms in a way that doesn't fully resolve anything. Keep the international community satisfied, keep domestic landholders reassured, but don't actually hand back enough to close the wound. Now, whether that's cold calculation or just simply the impossible arithmetic of a country trying to undo decades of damage without the money or political room to do it, that question doesn't have a clean answer. But what we can say is this: Zimbabwe's collapse wasn't a random catastrophe. It wasn't a drought. It wasn't an invasion, not a foreign enemy. It was the product of a real historical injustice. Colonial land inequality that left millions of people dispossessed, pursued through a method so reckless and so contemptuous of economic reality that it destroyed the productive system that the entire country depended on. The $100 trillion note is not a punchline. It's a physical record of what happens when a government decides that political urgency matters more than institutional stability. When a state dismantles the engine keeping its economy alive and discovers, too late, that you can redistribute land.
Yeah, you can't mess with your money horse. If that's your money horse right there, you can't just gamble that and then give it to your friends who gonna say, yeah, I got you. And so, they're trying to make side deals. Oh my God, what not to do 101.
But you cannot redistribute knowledge.
Well, I'm glad the guy's ass out of here. Mugabe, what his name is, I'm glad they got him out of here. Did he get popped? I mean, I'm sorry. If 95% of your population is broke, good riddance. 95% of the population of your country went broke. 95%. Crazy. I don't have to be Zimbabwean to have empathy for people in Zimbabwe. That means so many people have to go to different countries to try to find work. That's what that means. So, yeah. Good riddance.